What do the people want? We asked that very question at the start of the week as France's yellow vest protests headed into a fifth week. We asked it again when the UK Prime Minister pulled the vote in Parliament on Brexit Tuesday. Now it's on to Brussels, where a constant din of insurgent blowback weighs on EU leaders who find themselves with the same Theresa May, but no closer to closure on Brexit. And just as divided over how to address the frustrations of EU citizens who themselves are divided, the poster child for a more federal Europe has just had his wings clipped. Emmanuel Macron's reforms undermined by cost of living concessions to protesters that will push up France's deficit and make it harder to lecture, say, Italy's populists on their own budgetary excesses. What do the people want? With the US, China, and Russia pushing their own interests, how does a unified European Union come up with an argument for unity that convinces those who no longer trust the powers that govern? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at the popular discontent on the continent. With us, Yves Bertoncini, president of Mouvement Européen France, a pro-EU advocacy group. How are you, sir?
Fine, thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Thanks as well to Jean Messia of what used to be called the National Front, the National Renewal. Is that how you say it in English?
No, it's a Rassemblement National in French, or National Rally.
National Rally,
Yeah,
the National Rally
Rally.
Party.
Yeah.
Advisor to Marine Le Pen will be joined from New York by Harvard University's Yasha Monk shortly. The France 24 debate on Facebook and on Twitter, hashtag F24debate. This was supposed to be the summit where we moved on from the divorce deal to future post-Brexit trade relations. Now, though, with the UK Parliament's votes suspended, it's not even the end of the beginning for Brexit. However, after surviving a Wednesday leadership challenge amongst the Tories, Theresa May promising it's the beginning of the end for herself.
I've said that, in my heart, I would love to be able to lead the Conservative Party into the next general election, but I think it is right that the party feels that it would prefer to go into that election with a new leader.
Okay, so Yves Bertoncini, she's not saying when she's leaving, but she says that she is leaving before the next general election. Now, because she's survived that vote of confidence on Wednesday, it means there can't be another leadership challenge for at least a year within her own party. The Theresa May that walked into the main hall there in Brussels this Thursday, strengthened or weakened?
Well, both, I would say. But, it was a very useful tactical move from her side, since the difficulties of the Brexit negotiation is that they mix different problems. There was a leadership contest in the Conservative Party, so at least she said, well, don't try to fire me because I will not run for next general election. And in addition, she won the vote. So at least she tried to say, well, now this is fixed, and now we're going to kind of focus more on what is the substance of the problem. Brexit and the end of this first phase of the negotiation. And the problem she faces, but not only her, is that actually there are several Brexits. Not only one. Of course, there was a liberal Brexit, Brexiters, hard Brexiters, thinking that the EU is the Soviet Union, so they want to have more freedom to conclude a trade partnership with Singapore and all this. But there was another Brexit, a more, let's say, protectionist one, from popular masses, thinking that free trade and, free movement of people is not desirable. So, in fact, it's very difficult for her to reconcile both sides of the Brexit, if I may say. And in addition, of course, the question is, what do people want? Those who wanted to vote for Brexit, and after all, it's a democratic choice. It has to be delivered. But for example, they had not in mind at all what is one of the problems we have to fix now, which is the border between the two islands. This was never mentioned during the referendum campaign. So it's even harder now to face such difficulties for her.
Yves Bertoncini mentioning an important point. The question in the referendum was, do you want to leave the European Union? It wasn't why do you want to leave the European Union? And the problem is you have a Conservative Party that is divided between those who see Brexit as a way of having more free trade, more open borders, and those who are afraid of globalization and who want those borders closed. Jean Messia, where would you stand among those two very contradictory crowds?
Well, first of all, the question of the referendum was very clear. I mean, do you want to leave or not? And the question and the answer was yes, we want to leave. So I see that every time people vote in a way which is not in favor of what the elites were dictating, we try to empty the vote from its substance by saying that people maybe they did not.
Which side are you on? Are you more on the side where you'd like to see, if you had been voting in this, and obviously you're not a UK subject, but that you would be among those more in favor of more freedom for the UK, or on the side of those who want protection from the way world trade operates currently?
Well, we are witnessing a very hard process of Brexiting. So we are in favor of creating a new Europe based on nations in order to avoid this type of examples. We are in favor of changing Europe from the inside instead of Frexiting, as we used to say last year in the presidential election. Now we are more in favor of reforming the European Union, and I think the next European election...
more in favor of the protectionist side.
Yes, of course, because what is the error of Europe? The error of Europe is to consider that we can build a political project by leaving the people behind. And what was the answer of the British people is mainly, we do not want to be left behind, we do not want to be set aside, we want to be a full part of the European integration.
All right, it's one of those rare instances where the European Union, over Brexit, is united. And we can hear that from the words of the Dutch Prime Minister.
First of all, it will be impossible to break open the negotiated withdrawal agreement. I think that is a given. So what we need to do, because of the red lines, you guys in the UK yourself drew, which was one, no border in the Irish Sea, no membership of the customs union, no free movement of people. Given all those red lines, this is the only deal possible on the table.
We've trapped ourselves in our own red lines.
Well, that's up to you to think.
He's a columnist for Slate, teaches at Harvard University. Yasha Monk joins us from New York. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
But before I turn to you, Yasha, just a quick question reacting to what we just heard from Mark Rutte. What can the EU do at this point for Theresa May from this summit? What can they offer her?
Well, sending some political signals to say, well, we have drafted a deal, we negotiated a deal during more than 1 year and a half, withdrawal agreement. I mean, there's no problem from the European side to see the Brits living. Absolutely no problems. The only thing is that, there is no problem. There is a problem in Westminster because they cannot ratify this deal for political reasons, complexity of British political life.
European Union has no interest in making a very easy Brexit, so that Brexit will not be an example for other countries to live.
The Brexit is difficult simply because
Mrs.
May said Brexit means out of the single market, out of the customs union, and this was to create a border between the two islands. That's the problem they are facing. But I mean, there's absolutely no obstacle from the other 27.
Come on.
You know what? Because the other 27, they want this thing fixed because, with all due respect with the Brits, there are more pressing challenges ahead of us. Terrorism, Putin, Trump, chaos in everywhere. I mean, Trump is not a threat, of course, but it's a factor of destabilization, climate change. So if this could be fixed, and if the vote could have intervened as planned, last Tuesday, it would be better. I mean, the problem is in Westminster, so I hope they will find a way. The problem of the Brits is that they want to live the house, but they don't know how to live. No.
Yasha Monk, what do you make of the gridlock at Westminster?
Well, I mean, I think it's a strange thing in politics where it can seem for a long time that fundamental laws of logic don't apply. So for years, you can go on as though they didn't apply, and people start to believe that the laws of logic don't apply because they don't seem to, and then suddenly they all come home to roost. Somebody put it best a couple of days ago that the basic nature of Brexit is to have promised people a submarine made out of cheese. And Theresa May has done her very best to create that submarine out of cheese. But eventually you put the submarine into the water and you see that it doesn't work. So the Brexiteers have told Brits that they're going to get a huge economic boost, that they're going to get all of their sovereignty back, and at the same time they're going to be able to trade in exactly the same terms as before. They're having a hard border to immigrants, and yet there's no friction at the Irish border. All of those things are mutually incompatible. And now that people have to vote on a deal that doesn't respect all of those things, because it's impossible to do all of them at the same time, there's no majority for it. And so it's a mess that was predictable for the past 2 years. And what's amazing is that large parts of the British media and political class have closed their eyes to that evident fact for so long.
The difficulty here, Yasha, is what do you do? Because it seems as though right now, still in the UK, everybody can agree on what they don't like, but it's so hard to get people to a majority to find something that they agree on that they like.
Well, look, I'm not a British citizen and I don't want to speak for what the country should do. But one thing that's obvious is that it needs to make is that it needs to acknowledge the reality of the choices in front of it and then make up its mind. So I see broadly 3 options. The first of which is to say, you know what, it is so important to us to be part of a single market. It is so important to us to be part of that trading zone. And once we acknowledge that means that we have to be bound by certain rules, we want a seat at the table. And that means that they should renege on Brexit, have a second referendum, and allow people to go back on it. The second option is to say, no, we definitely want to be out of the EU, but we do also want to have some amount of real access to the single market. And in that sense, in that case, they have to accept that they're going to be rule takers and not rule makers, and essentially accept a version of Theresa May's deal. Or they can say, you know what, it's so important to us that we have complete sovereignty here in Britain, that we aren't subject to any rules made in Brussels, that we are willing to inflict tremendous economic damage on our country. And that's coherent, and then they have to leave the European Union. What they can't go on doing is to pretend that that basic option set doesn't exist, that they can have their cake and eat it too and turn it into a submarine and have it float in the sea.
Have it float in the sea. A lot of people are worried on this side of the channel because a no-deal Brexit could wreak havoc in places like Normandy, north of France, where a lot of those goods come in and out. Jean Messia, which of the options on offer do you think would be the most sensible?
Well, I think that the Brexit process is very complex by itself, objectively speaking. But I also think that this process is made more complex by the European Union to just delay the process in order maybe in 1 year or 2 years to make Britain vote again, like we witnessed this process in Denmark some years ago when people vote wrong.
You heard the Dutch Prime Minister say, look, we're just doing what the British Prime Minister wanted on this.
The agreement that was signed some days ago, I think it is a false Brexit. It is a false Brexit because it is not giving the answers that British people gave in the referendum, and which was recalled by Theresa May when she said Brexit is Brexit. Today, Brexit is half Brexit.
But what kind of Brexit did Britain actually vote on? If you go back to the time of a referendum, all of the leading Brexiteers were saying, obviously we're going to stay in the single market. Obviously there'll be no hard border.
Not all of them said this.
And then over the course of the last 2 years, it has kept radicalizing. So the problem with a referendum on a subject that is as complex as membership in the European Union is that the option set isn't clear. It was clear what it meant to stay in the European Union. Everybody could imagine what the fantasy was of the favorite exit option.
I do not agree with that. I do not agree with that.
And so to say that exiting the single market is somehow a betrayal of the British people or of the voice of the British people is simply unhistorical. Go back to what people were saying for the vote.
You are not analyzing objectively the case. You are making politics. The Brexit referendum is not more complex than when France voted for the abandoning of its national currency in Maastricht in 1992. I think when we abandoned.
But you agree that we don't. When they voted for Brexit, it didn't spell out what kind of Brexit. That's fact.
Yes, that's fact. I am not saying it is not a difficult process. We witnessed that when with Northern
Apparently,
Ireland.
sometimes facts are politics. But go ahead.
No. I'm talking because when France voted in 1992, nobody was here to say, well, we do not see exactly on what people pronounce, on what question the people really answer. It was automatic. Although we have only 51% of yes for abandoning an 800-old currency, and nobody was saying there was any kind of problem. Now, because the British people voted against all what the mainstream analytics, politics, medias was dictating them, now there is a huge problem. And basically this discussion is a proof of the way European Union is handling the Brexit dossier.
Yves Bertoncini, we've seen in the debate that's gone on this week, the argument has also been between who has the say on this. Is it the Prime Minister's office? Is it Parliament? Or, as some people would like to see, a second referendum, what they call a people's vote. Is this the few?
On this, if I may, the EU is totally neutral. It's up to them to decide. The Brits. I mean, there's no need for a referendum to go out of the EU. It could have been voted by the Parliament. The EU is not a jail. It's not Soviet Union. Article 50 allows you to live. Article 50 is very clear. To live, we need a deal. We have 2 years since the letter has been sent. If there's no deal, there will be a Brexit. So there's absolutely no prisoners in this. If they don't ratify this deal, there will be a Brexit. So
why the European Union is
don't blame the
insisting
EU
or making
for
it
this.
hard?
No, not at all. You have two things. First, a divorce deal. Simply because before leaving, you need to pay what you owe, and then you need to protect the citizens, and then this problem of the Irish border. So this is fixed by the divorce deal to be ratified. Again, if it's not ratified, there will be a Brexit.
Okay.
And then, apart from that, there is a transition period to let the Brits and the 27 negotiate a deal on the future relation. That will be done in any case.
Only one question.
What is the will of the people? We have to go to the break. So
that's the problem.
Yeah.
What is the will of the people? We've been asking about it when it comes to Brexit. We'll also ask about it when it comes to Emmanuel Macron's concessions to the Yellow Vests movement. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're speaking while they're negotiating in Brussels at a European Union summit. We've been asking what the people want when it comes to Brexit. What do the people want when it comes to reform here on the continent? We're talking about it with Yves Bertoncini, president of the Mouvement Européen France, a pro-EU advocacy group. Welcome back as well to Jean Messia of the National Rally, is that how you say it?
We can translate it like that.
Before the National Front of
Rassemblement
Marine Le Pen.
National.
Yasha Monk, who lectures at Harvard University, columnist for Slate. Welcome back, joining us from New York City. This was supposed to be the summit where Emmanuel Macron finally got his wish, a Eurozone budget. The good news is, for him, is that it's on, albeit in a watered-down version, but all that's been overshadowed by the French president's concessions to Yellow Vests protesters on Monday. In Brussels, Macron assured reporters that in no way will his cost of living measures somehow put the lid on the curbing of the state's expenses that he has undertook with reforms.
I don't think any country will advance if it doesn't also recognize this element of growing anger on the part of our people. It's expressing itself everywhere across Europe, with growing support for extreme parties in certain countries. We saw it with Brexit a couple years ago in Great Britain. In my own country's policies, I will never lead the European project that I believe in against aspirations that I see as legitimate. I think they're reconcilable, and that's what we're doing.
Yves Bertoncini, just to remind our viewers here, you have Angela Merkel as a lame duck chancellor. You have European elections coming up. This 40-year-old French president who said, I'm going to be the poster child for changing the narrative and making it so that voters embrace the idea of a federal Europe. All this in the build-up to European elections, which are coming up in May. Is all of that out the window with the concessions that he made to the yellow vests earlier this week?
You want to make me cry. I mean, just to be serious, for the Europe to be strong, we need strong member states. And in the world we're facing with all the challenges, global challenges, security challenges, we would need to have strong government in France, in Germany, in Italy, everywhere. And it's not the case, unfortunately. So it's even harder now for them to meet and to take bold decisions. They are going to take some decisions. You've mentioned the Eurozone budget. Yes, there will be one, but then after it will take time to implement it correctly, to know what to do with it. The problem of Emmanuel Macron in this context is that he has shifted from a new pioneer, a prophet of the European integration, which he still is and which is very, very useful, into a situation of domestic weakness. Since, yes, there is a yellow vest movement, but beyond this, his popular rating have decreased a lot. So it's a problem for him, since his influence in Europe and in the world has been damaged by what has been seen. For example, the Arc de Triomphe protest, symbolically it was a disaster. So now, what he has to do, he announced important decisions. He has to take back control of the situation. He also has to go on reforming France so to have real good results, which is not the case if you look at the debt, but not only debt. The unemployment rate, many very, very, very specific results, concrete results. And with these dynamics, depending on the result of the next European election, which should not be very good, he will keep on, trying to appear as someone who wants to shape Europe, to reset Europe, as he said. And I think this is needed.
How weakened is Emmanuel Macron, Yasha Monk?
I think he's quite weak. He's obviously very unpopular. It's striking that he's less popular than Donald Trump in current opinion polls. I think it's important to see that as part of a general trend in French politics. In my book, The People versus Democracy, I show the extent to which each of the last three presidents lost popularity incredibly quickly. That was true of Jacques Chirac. It was even more true of Nicolas Sarkozy and of François Hollande. So what we're seeing is that the system isn't capable of delivering for people what they're expecting of it. Every 4 or 5 years, a new leader comes to the top of the political system. People project a lot of hopes into him or her. They think this is really going to change the country. And about a year or a year and a half in, they say, well, you know what? I'm not seeing the country be completely transformed. I'm not seeing all of my hopes realized. So let's kick him to the side and go on to the next one. And then, of course, there's people who try to exploit that by essentially saying that the whole political system is illegitimate, that if your hopes and expectations keep being dashed, then the right response is simply to destroy the whole thing. And so that's the situation.
And we've seen a lot of violence. We've seen a lot of there's a climate of violence right now in France.
There is, and I think if you look at some of the demands, and there's no official demands, but there's a lot of lists of demands that have circulated over the last weeks that people are making. It's what in English we would call cakeism. So people want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to halve the taxes that the French state has at the same time as hiring a whole new set of civil servants and so on. So it's gâteauisme, if you want. And responding to that is very hard. I think Macron is trying to walk a careful line between defending some of the basic reforms that he has started over the last year and a half and taking more energetic action to ensure that ordinary people actually profit from them. I think, ironically, there's a little bit of an opportunity in him in that violence you mentioned, because it is going to make the movement a lot less popular in the weeks and months to come, and that presents him with an opportunity to show himself as having a strong hand resisting the casseurs, the people who want to go around looting and breaking things. But I think it's clear that his popularity is severely damaged, and he is unlikely to be the kind of energetic reformer with political capital that a lot of people expected and hoped a year ago.
The Yellow Vests were already divided over whether to return to Paris this coming Saturday after those concessions. Then, of course, came Tuesday evening's terror attack targeting Strasbourg's Christmas market. Demonstrations in Paris and throughout France still authorized. The only place where rallies are banned is Strasbourg itself. Now, what will the Yellow Vests do?
I think it's going to put an end to the movement, or some people will react violently, and I don't agree with that.
How is it possible that a lone person, known to security services, who commits a crime and kills 3 people, injuring 12 more, can just disappear into thin air, while we're under monitor, while we count for nothing? It seems strange, that's all.
Yeah, there are a lot of conspiracy theories about how somehow this plot may have been orchestrated by the government, and those have been relayed a lot on social media. A couple of questions for you, Jean Messia. First of all, should the Yellow Vests demonstrate again this Saturday in Paris?
I'm very surprised because you did not make me react to the popularity of Macron and its measures. So, in a national rally, we can speak also about economics, not only about security.
We will talk about economics again, I promise
and conspiracy theory, you know. I don't feel anybody can say to Yellow Vest to demonstrate or not, because, as you know, Yellow Vest is a popular movement. Without any leadership. It is a spontaneous popular movement. Since the beginning, nobody can order the Yellow Vest to stay in their home or to demonstrate. And if it is under the risk of terrorism, I think the role of the government is to protect the nation and to allow the nation to have a normal life on all its aspects, including the right of demonstrating, which is a constitutional right. So,
which they have for the time being still.
Which they have for the time being. So,
and do you agree with Yasha Monk that there's this difficulty because it's a leaderless movement? There's so many different people with different demands. We don't know who is actually representing a lot of people when they make those demands.
No, if you try to understand the core of the movement, it is the central people of France. All these people that is outside the radars of the politics since 40 years now. These people living in the vicinities, living in the periphery of big cities, which are not the electorate of Emmanuel Macron, basically.
A lot of them did vote for Macron.
A lot of them did vote for us, did vote for Marine Le Pen. This is a huge electorate for the national rally, this Yellow Vest. And their demand and their revendication, if you cast a look on them, you will find main common points between this revendication and our presidential project. So I think these people now is saying, basically, we are here. What is the symbol of the yellow? The symbol of the yellow is very strong. It means we are here. See us. Because, the Yellow Vest is used on the road for people to be seen.
Those high visibility vests.
Exactly. Yeah. So this is a very strong political symbol of a people who has disappeared from the political scene and which is now, yelling, see us, see us.
Yves Bertoncini, again, getting back to how does Europe see this?
Well, with a kind of understanding, I think they are worried. I mean, Europe is worried about what's happening in France since there have been violence. I think Yasha and Jean are both right in saying that they see a problem in the French political system. The French political system, which is quite unique in Europe, gives all the power to one man, because since after the presidential election, you have a general election, but it's automatically, a majority given to this man. And in the last 2 decades, you see that the man, when is weakened sometimes for personal reasons, because Emmanuel Macron acknowledged that sometimes he shouldn't have said different, different sentences,
deeper than
which
that.
were but I mean there is a specificity of the French political system.
Yeah, the leader
and
becomes a magnet for
yeah, then it's worrying because normally it's a kind of absolutism with no checks and balances.
Republican monarchy.
And a Republican monarchy. I agree with you, but it does not deliver. So Europe is worried about this. Europe is all worried that Macron appeared as a prophet, wanted to be a prophet, and is now a fireman.
Yeah,
only.
but the problem is not in the institutions themselves. The problem is a problem of men, is a problem of responsible, because this institution basically functioned very well when it was people like de Gaulle on the power, when it was Pompidou, and as the Chinese proverb put it, the fish start rotting from the head.
Yes.
So if you have,
all right.
But it was a different
it's
period.
very interesting to hear the political force that was. It was very interesting to see the political force that was a sworn enemy of General de Gaulle and of Pompidou to suddenly talk them up as the great.
We are the inherit of General de Gaulle today.
Well, I mean, that's not what Jean-Marie Le Pen would have said at the time.
Jean-Marie Le Pen is not in our party anymore. You should change your CD. Jean-Marie Le Pen is not in our party.
That's why I said that that's not what he would have said at the time. But let me make two serious points.
Time change. Time change.
Okay. The first is that it's very interesting to see this kind of nostalgia which these movements always have. But the most important thing that I want to say is that it's not just a weakness of Emmanuel Macron. It's a weakness of all of the existing political parties and movements in France. And what's very striking is that, though I agree that the Yellow Vests come in part from the electorate that voted for Marine Le Pen, they don't see her as a hero either. In fact, Marine Le Pen is now started to be seen as just as much part of the French political establishment as anybody else, because she's been in existence for 15 years. She makes her living from it. She has been a presidential candidate many times. And so this shows a deep challenge that social media technology, the taste for political novelty poses for all political movements, particularly for the establishment, particularly for ones that perhaps incarnate, as Emmanuel Macron does, the sort of more metropolitan, more forward-looking, perhaps more affluent France. But it is also very much a problem for movements like the Rassemblement National, which is finding it harder and harder to represent this kind of anger, even with a radical figure like.
So what do you? Hang on. Let me just ask you about this, Yasha Monk, because this was a movement that came out of nowhere, and it's thanks to Facebook. It was 8 people on Facebook at the start, and it spread like wildfire. What lessons can the rest of Europe draw?
Well, I don't know what lessons it can draw specifically, but it shows the role of social media. One way of thinking about that is that even 20, 25 years ago, we still had a system of one-to-many communication. So to reach a mass audience or to organize a big protest, you had to have tremendous resources. You needed to own a television or radio channel or a newspaper, or to be invited onto the stage to share your opinions. In order to organize a mass protest, you had to have a deep Rolodex of all of the local organizers and people who could rent buses to car them to the national capital and so on and so forth. Today, we have a much more amorphous system of many-to-many communication, where people can put something on Facebook, say, hey, you know what, I'm really pissed off with the situation. Let's put on our yellow vest, let's go out into the street. And this can snowball. And lots of people can come and join, each for their own motives with slightly different ideals. And suddenly you have this kind of rage in the streets. And that makes it much harder for any government to be in control of a situation. That's certainly true of some of the more moderate established governments, but it's also true of a lot of the populist governments around the world. And so I think you just have an empowerment of the opposition that's going to make our political systems more fluid and more contested for a long time to come.
I do not agree with the fact that all the party could be mixed in the same pot and say this is the establishment. The establishment are the parties who govern France the past 40 years. And basically, National Rally did not govern France.
Okay, most of the opinion polls though show.
I'm sorry to say. I wish that it was true, because I don't want to be on the same side as you. I think we both would be very, very happy to be on different sides. in the view of the yellow vest,
yeah, but
the two of us are on the
I
same
am
side. That's
engaged in
sad.
politics. You are presenting yourself as an analyst,
Right,
and you are actually a politic.
The polls show a slight bump for both the far
Sorry?
right. The polls show
Yeah.
a slight bump for both the far right and far left, but not some huge groundswell.
Of course, some huge grounds.
All right.
24% in the next national European election against 80%
A groundswell. I meant because of the yellow vests.
Because of the yellow vests, of
talking
course.
about what Yasha Monk was talking about. How when Facebook is driving the message, France's budget deficit, by the way, now flirting with the Eurozone's red line equivalent of the 3% of GDP, the same week when Italy, a country whose leaders use Facebook a lot, promised to tighten their belts. The Prime Minister going to Brussels Thursday to promise a few billion euros off its plan for a sort of universal basic income, a lowering of the retirement age. And while the Commission examines whether it really will lower that public debt from 2.4 to 2% GDP, far-right Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini's been crowing about Macron's breaking of France's piggy bank. He's been doing it on Twitter. He's also been doing it on Facebook. He said, given the problems in France, dialogue between Berlin and Rome can reboot Europe. The Franco-German axis is showing its limits. I will do everything I can to renew a Rome-Berlin axis. Yves Bertoncini.
Well, first, I think Italy is facing two main problems. Debt GDP ratio above 130%. So it's really a challenge for them. And second, a government formed by two opposite politic forces which decided to merge and to form a government. With one force, Cinque Stelle wanted to spend much more public expenditures. And on the other side, La Lega, Matteo Salvini, wanted to cut taxes. So this is very difficult to
reconcile the two.
Yeah, of course. And then,
but on the European scale, would you say
yes,
that they're winning this public relations
I want to
war?
say this because first and foremost, the markets has to lend a lot of money to Italy, and then the markets, which means us, our savings, we are monitoring Italy, and we'll see if there are an overreaction of the markets or not. As regards the political reaction from Brussels, Berlin, and elsewhere, there are concerns about Italy, including because the style of Salvini doesn't help. Now there is concern about France, of course, because France will...
And the style of Macron doesn't help also?
Yes, but he's more pro-European, but there's a difference. He's pro-European. The difference is also that Macron is ruling a country who had a good trend, who is facing a crisis. Macron can afford, letting the deficit go a bit away, let's say.
Because he's supported by all the
What
European elites.
What I want to say is that it's not a dogma. The 3% dogma, France has complied with this limit the last 10 years only twice. So you will never be excommunicated, whether you're Italians or French, by this dogma, but you could be threatened by financial markets.
Macron lost a lot of credibility in not only regarding his managing of the yellow vest crisis, he lost also a lot of credibility in Europe. How come a president that will explode the 3% criteria or convergence criteria of Maastricht could go to Germany and say, okay, let's do...
So he shouldn't have made those concessions?
No, he should have made those concessions, but budgeting, because they presented us, Macron, as a professor of economics, as a serious project in comparison of ours. And today we are facing a Macron that try to extinguish a fire himself, set it on.
Yasha Monk, how do the Germans see it all?
Well, I think what they see is a fundamental difference between Italy and France, which first of all consists in the fact that Italy has much, much, much bigger debt and has trouble raising the money it needs in order to finance its debts on its own in the financial markets. And so that is potentially a huge threat to the stability of the euro and the European economy. That's simply not the case in France. If France has 3.5% rather than 2.5% of debt for a year, it is nowhere close to being in danger of running out of money and therefore of having all of those knock-on effects. Now, there's some German economists who do think of a 3% rule in somewhat dogmatic ways, who think that it should never be breached under any circumstances. I disagree with them personally. But Germany itself, of course, has broken those rules often as well. In fact, under Gerhard Schröder's government, precisely because the country was doing structural reforms which helped the country grow in the long run, they said when you have a moment of those structural reforms,
it's okay to tamper that
in the short run.
We're caught up. We're caught by the clock. I want to thank Yasha Monk for joining us from New York. Yves Bertonchini, Jean Messia. Stay with us. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Charlie James.
Hello there. So, I want to point out some things online that are getting a lot of attention right now. A number of EU leaders used the meeting with Theresa May today to send subtle and some not so subtle digs at the Brexit process. Let's start off with Jean-Claude Juncker, RTE journalist Tony Conley, tweeting that he learned that the president of the European Commission made a pointed satirical diplomacy mark today by wearing a green tie specifically to make a point about the EU standing behind the Republic of Ireland on the backstop issue. So subtle, but interesting there to do that. The president of Lithuania, on the other hand, was a little less subtle. She tweeted this saying, "Brexit Christmas wish, finally decide what you really want and Santa will deliver," along with a picture of this chocolate tree. So she's being a little less subtle there. And then we can go to Mark Rutte, the Dutch Prime Minister. He spoke to the media at the summit today in both Dutch and English, but he made a little different remarks.
Because we heard the ones in English.
Right, so AFP reporter Danny Kemp pointing out that what Rutte did not say in his English comments is that if anyone in the Netherlands thinks Nexit is a good idea, look at England and see the enormous damage it does. So a little bit different comments there for different audiences, depending on who he's speaking to. And finally, I want to show you what Jose Manuel Barroso, the former president of the European Commission, said on Twitter. He said, "Now that Brexit appears unavoidable, it's extremely important to get a deal that avoids the so-called hard Brexit. The European Union, that until now has shown such remarkable coherence and intelligence on this issue, should show some flexibility on the backstop." So urging a little bit, giving in by
giving something,
a little bit of something. So, and of course, with Christmas around the corner, some people are getting a little creative with their opinions on Brexit. So outside, here's a video from yesterday. An Environment Secretary, Michael Gove, was accosted by an irate Santa Claus as he entered Parliament Wednesday. You can't hear it, but in the video, Santa tells him he's not going to be getting any presents this year. And people have also been receiving Brexit-related Christmas cards and tweeting them out, some funny ones.
You had to bring Brexit up.
Yeah, you had to bring Brexit up here, and user questioning how many fights there's going to be over Christmas this holiday season with this vote in limbo. Another card here that someone received, "Merry Christmas, remain dear." And this one getting a lot of attention online. This is actually from former Labour leader Ed Miliband, this is his 2018 Christmas card, which he uses
He's got his Christmas jumper, I can see.
He's using to troll former Prime Minister David Cameron there. It references an infamous tweet that has since come to haunt Cameron a little bit. This tweet here that he made in the lead up to the 2015 campaign, saying, "Britain faces a simple and inescapable choice, stability and a strong government with me or chaos with Ed Miliband." And so using that as a subtle holiday troll.
Yes, things on the internet, they stay around after you've written.
That's right.
All right, many thanks for that, Charlie James. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.